The alarm buzzed at 5:15, but Garrett Cross had been awake for 7 minutes already. 8 years of this routine had rewired something fundamental in his circadian rhythm, the same way 9 years in a cockpit had taught his hands to reach for controls that no longer existed. He rolled out of bed in the darkness of his Denver apartment, feet finding the worn carpet without thought, and walked to the bathroom while his daughter still slept. The face in the mirror belonged to a man who'd learned to disappear. 40 years old, though the gray at his temples made strangers guess 45. Calloused hands from equipment work, not flight gloves. Eyes that tracked movement with precision his job description never required. He splashed water on his face and tried not to think about the dream he'd been having when the alarm interrupted. The one where timing synchronization drifted 0.4 milliseconds and two aircraft occupied the same coordinates at convergent velocities. Harper's room smelled like strawberry shampoo and the faint chemical tang of dry erase markers. She'd fallen asleep with her science textbook open, a half-finished diagram of orbital mechanics sketched across the page. 9 years old, and already asking questions that made Garrett's chest ache with pride and terror in equal measure. He touched her shoulder gently. She blinked awake, instantly alert the way Claire used to be. Some mornings, Garrett saw his dead wife so clearly in their daughter's face that breathing became a conscious effort. "Good morning, kiddo." Harper stretched, pushing dark hair from her eyes. "Is it Wednesday?" "All day." "Ugh, Wednesdays are worse than Mondays because you think they should be better, but they're not." Garrett smiled despite himself, moving to open her curtains. The December sunrise painted Denver's skyline in shades of copper and steel. That's very philosophical for 5:30 in the morning. I'm intellectually curious, not weird. You can be both. Breakfast was scrambled eggs and toast, the extent of Garrett's culinary competence. Harper insisted on cutting her toast into precise geometric shapes, narrating the structural integrity of triangles versus rectangles, while Garrett drank coffee and pretended the morning news didn't exist. The world kept spinning with or without his attention. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. "Dad," Harper said suddenly, her fork paused midair. "Miss Stevens said, you used to be important. Were you?" The question landed like turbulence, unexpected and impossible to ignore. Garrett set down his mug carefully, buying seconds to construct an answer that wasn't a lie but wouldn't unravel everything he'd built. "I used to fly. Now I make sure people have what they need to do their jobs. Both matter." Harper studied him with those two perceptive eyes. "But you miss flying. Every day. But I wouldn't trade being your dad for anything that ever happened in a cockpit. Even the important stuff, especially the important stuff." She seemed satisfied with that, returning to her toast triangles. Garrett checked his watch. 6:42. Time accelerated differently once Harper entered the equation. Every minute with her stretched and compressed simultaneously, precious and insufficient. The drive to Riverside Academy took 18 minutes through morning traffic that never varied more than 90 seconds either direction. Garrett had the route memorized down to which traffic lights would catch him, which lanes moved fastest, where the school crossing guard would wave. Predictability was the foundation of everything. Structure created normalcy. Normalcy kept the past buried. Harper grabbed her backpack, paused at the car door. "Tonight's the science fair meeting. I'm doing my project on satellite deployment mechanisms." Garrett felt something shift in his chest. Pride mixed with the ever-present fear that she'd inherited more than just Claire's sharp mind. She'd gotten his need to understand systems, to take them apart and see how they worked. That curiosity had once launched him into the sky. It had also destroyed his career. That sounds ambitious. Mom would have helped me make it better. She would have, but you're already making it great on your own. Harper smiled, the expression transforming her whole face. See you at 5:45, 5:45? Not a second later. He watched until she disappeared through the double doors, counted to 10 the way he always did, then pulled back into traffic. The weight in his chest eased fractionally. She was safe. She was inside walls where bad things couldn't reach her. For the next 8 hours, the world couldn't touch what mattered most. Apex Tactical Systems occupied a glass and steel complex in the Denver Tech Center, the kind of building designed to project innovation and dominance. Garrett scanned his badge at the south entrance at exactly 7:38, took the service elevator to avoid the main lobby, and walked the maintenance corridors to the equipment management office. His job title, Facility Systems Coordinator, sounded technical and meant very little. He managed inventories, scheduled equipment maintenance, ensured the right supplies reached the right departments at the right times. Critical work that became invisible the moment it functioned correctly. The morning passed in its usual rhythm of insignificance. Equipment requests, inventory reconciliation, a discussion about replacing aging HVAC filters in Building C. Work that mattered in aggregate but disappeared in specifics. At 9:47, his supervisor messaged him about covering the executive strategy session that afternoon. Regular facilities representative had food poisoning. Garrett acknowledged without comment, collected his tablet, and tried to ignore the familiar tightness in his shoulders. Executive sessions meant visibility. Visibility meant questions. Questions meant risk. The conference room commanded the building's top floor, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the Rocky Mountains' eastern face. Garrett positioned himself in his customary location, back corner near the emergency exit, outside the cone of importance. His tablet showed climate control readings that required no monitoring, but the screen gave him somewhere to direct his eyes that wasn't the 30 people settling into their seats. Victoria Harrington commanded the front of the room with the presence of someone who'd spent years turning competence into authority. 43 years old, former naval logistics officer turned defense industry CEO, she spoke in complete paragraphs constructed from data points, each sentence reinforced with metrics that had been validated by 3 separate departments. Her presentations didn't inspire, they convinced. Our Atlas Autonomous Flight Network represents the future of military aviation. 6 unmanned aircraft coordinated through a single AI system. Real-time threat assessment, dynamic mission adaptation, 0 human latency. It's not evolution, it's revolution. Garrett kept his eyes on his tablet. He'd heard variations of this presentation 4 times in the past 6 months. The language changed, machine learning, predictive algorithms, next-generation architecture, but the promise remained constant. Technology would eliminate human weakness. The AI would never hesitate, never doubt, never override protocol because gut instincts screamed that something was wrong. The test alarm cut through Victoria's sentence about projected market dominance, standard safety protocol, quarterly system verification. Everyone in the room had experienced it before. Most reactions were minimal. A brief glance upward, a momentary pause in typing, immediate return to importance. Garrett's body betrayed 8 years of discipline. His weight shifted forward, his shoulders squared, his head cocked precisely 12 degrees toward the alarm's origin with the precision of someone calculating distance and threat level. His right hand moved toward his hip, reaching for equipment that hadn't hung there since he'd signed documents promising to forget it ever existed. The entire sequence lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Victoria noticed. She was mid-sentence about competitive advantages when her peripheral vision caught the movement. Her words continued without interruption. Years of military briefings had taught her not to pause for distractions, but her eyes tracked the anomaly, filed it, marked it for later analysis. Garrett caught himself halfway through the reaching motion, forced his hand down to grip the tablet, resumed his practiced posture of complete disinterest. His heart hammered against his ribs with the irregular rhythm of adrenaline meeting nowhere to go. The alarm was just a test. Nothing was wrong. No one was dying because systems failed and protocol demanded trust over instinct. The presentation continued another 37 minutes. When it concluded, people dispersed to their respective territories of responsibility. Victoria walked past Garrett without acknowledgement, her chief of staff trailing behind with 2 tablets and an expression of permanent crisis management. Garrett checked his watch. 11:51. 5 hours and 54 minutes until he needed to leave. Not a second more. Not ever. At 2:15, his supervisor forwarded another assignment. Engineering Lab 3 needed equipment audit before the upcoming Atlas demonstration. Garrett acknowledged the message and felt the familiar weight settle in his chest. Lab 3 was where they were preparing the final test of the Distributed Autonomous Flight Network, the crown jewel project that would determine whether Apex won a $900 million defense contract. He'd been avoiding that lab for 3 weeks. The lab smelled like solder flux and new electronics, climate controlled to exactly 68 degrees. 6 workstations surrounded a central display wall showing real-time telemetry from test flights. Garrett moved through his audit with practiced efficiency, checking serial numbers against inventory databases, verifying calibration dates on measurement equipment, noting items requiring replacement or maintenance. He wasn't supposed to look at the coordination logs displayed on the test monitors. They weren't part of his job description, but his eyes found them anyway, the way a pilot's scan pattern never really disappeared no matter how many years passed. The timing synchronization between aircraft showed a consistent drift pattern, microseconds initially, accumulating to milliseconds over extended operation periods, well within the tolerances specified in the system requirements. Garrett's hands stopped moving. He'd seen this signature before, 9 years ago, in the cockpit of an F-35 over the Persian Gulf. 4 aircraft in tight formation, automated coordination system engaged, everything reading nominal until the accumulated timing lag caused 2 planes to simultaneously occupy the same spatial coordinates at convergent velocities. He'd recovered manually with 6 seconds to spare. Lieutenant Brennan Masters hadn't been as fortunate. Garrett stood in the lab for 7 minutes, staring at the logs while his pulse hammered in his ears. The numbers didn't lie. The pattern was identical, and if Atlas proceeded to full demonstration with 6 aircraft executing complex maneuvers across 15 waypoints, the timing drift would cascade somewhere around waypoint 7 or 8. The AI wouldn't recognize the problem because the drift stayed within programmed parameters. It would compensate until compensation became impossible, and then 2 or more aircraft would try to occupy the same airspace at the same instant. People would die. His phone vibrated. Message from Harper's school. Mr. Cross, Harper has a headache and asked to go home. Please call the office. Garrett checked the time. 2:43. He could leave now, pick her up, take her home, be the father who was always there when needed. Or he could stay. Find Dr. Elena Masters. Push hard enough that someone took the warning seriously before the demonstration killed people the way the Persian Gulf system had killed Brennan. But pushing meant explaining how he knew what he knew. It meant questions about background and expertise. It meant scrutiny that would eventually uncover the 8-year gap protecting everything he'd built. It meant risk to the only thing that mattered, being Harper's father, being present, being the one solid thing in her world after cancer had taken her mother. He texted the school, "On my way in 30 minutes. Then he went to find Dr. Masters, because some patterns were too dangerous to ignore, even when ignoring them would keep you safe. Dr. Elena Masters had 3 PhDs, 12 patents, and a personality that could freeze coffee at room temperature. Garrett found her in the simulation bay, surrounded by displays showing virtual aircraft executing coordinated maneuvers. She didn't look up when he entered, her attention fixed on a tablet showing cascading data streams that meant nothing to most people and everything to someone who'd spent 17 years architecting autonomous systems. I noticed something in the coordination logs. Elena's fingers continued moving across her screen. The logs are monitored by 6 separate systems. If there were a problem, those systems would alert me. The timing synchronization shows accumulated drift, within acceptable parameters individually, but under high-stress coordination scenarios with 6 aircraft, the cascade effect could. She finally turned, and the expression on her face suggested she was reconsidering her opposition to capital punishment for technical incompetence. Mr. Cross, your expertise, as I understand it, extends to equipment inventory and maintenance scheduling. Mine extends to autonomous system architecture, which I've been developing for 17 years. I appreciate your concern, but the Atlas system has been validated across 3,000 simulation hours and 200 flight test hours. The drift you've noticed is well understood and fully compensated by the AI's predictive algorithms. Garrett could have told her about the Persian Gulf, about formation flight at Mach 0.95, about watching 2 sets of instruments report green while aircraft closed at combined speeds exceeding 800 knots, about the 3 seconds of manual intervention that had saved one plane and failed to save another, and the court-martial that had blamed human override for the death that system failure had caused. But that would require explaining where he'd been, who he'd been, what he'd done. I'm asking you to run one additional test. High-density scenario, all 6 aircraft, maximum coordination complexity, worst-case timing accumulation. We've run that scenario 18 times. Run it again. With manual oversight ready. Elena stepped closer, her voice dropping to the particular tone people used when explaining reality to someone clearly detached from it. Why would we need manual oversight? That defeats the entire purpose of autonomous systems. Because autonomous systems fail when they encounter conditions outside their training parameters. And real-world conditions always include something the simulations missed. That's a philosophical objection, not a technical one. It's both. Elena's eyes narrowed. Mr. Cross, I'm going to say this once. Your job is inventory management. My job is keeping this company operational through successful project delivery. Unless you have specific technical credentials I'm unaware of, credentials relevant to advanced autonomous systems, I suggest you return to counting equipment and let me do my job. Garrett nodded slowly, feeling the familiar weight of words he couldn't speak pressing against his throat. Understood. He turned to leave, but Elena's voice stopped him at the door. Mr. Cross. He looked back. Why do you care about this? The question hung in the air between them. And for a moment, Garrett considered telling her the truth. That he cared because 9 years ago, he'd watched a good pilot die trusting a system that had betrayed that trust. that he cared because the signature in those logs was identical to the one that had killed Lieutenant Brennan Masters, her husband, though she didn't know Garrett knew that, didn't know she'd been working 2 feet away from the man the Navy had blamed for making her a widow. Because if I'm right and you're wrong, people die. Possibly people who don't deserve to die. Possibly people who have families waiting for them. Elena's expression didn't change. The entire point of autonomous systems is that people don't die. That's why we build them. Garrett left without responding. The security AI would flag the conversation within minutes. All engineering labs had audio monitoring for intellectual property protection. Victoria would hear it eventually. Another thread pulling at the fabric of his carefully constructed invisibility. Harper was waiting in the school nurse's office when he arrived at 3:18, holding an ice pack against her forehead. The nurse explained it was probably just dehydration. She'd skipped lunch because she'd been too excited about her science fair project to eat. Garrett signed the release forms and guided his daughter to the car, one hand on her shoulder. Better now. Yeah, sorry for making you leave work early. You never have to apologize for needing me. That's what I'm here for. They drove home in comfortable silence, Harper's hand finding the radio and landing on the classic rock station that reminded them both of Claire. Garrett's dead wife had sung along to Fleetwood Mac while doing dishes, had turned Tom Petty up loud on road trips, had slow danced with him in their kitchen to Eagles songs while Harper giggled from her high chair. The apartment they'd called home for 8 years occupied the second floor of a building that had been new in the 80s and showed it. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen barely large enough for 2 people. Harper's drawings covered the refrigerator, rockets and satellites and orbital mechanics diagrams that showed understanding beyond her years. Medical supplies sat in neat rows on the counter. A reminder of the scare 6 months ago when Harper had fainted during PE. Not diabetes, the doctors had determined after extensive testing. Just a growing 9-year-old who sometimes forgot to fuel the engine. But the fear never fully left. Garrett had already lost Claire to something he couldn't control. The thought of losing Harper made breathing difficult. She settled on the couch with her science textbook, and Garrett started dinner. Spaghetti with meat sauce, one of 3 meals he could make without consulting recipes. While the sauce simmered, he pulled out his laptop and did something he'd been avoiding for 3 weeks. He accessed the Atlas project files through his equipment management credentials and exported the timing synchronization logs for the past 6 months of testing. The pattern was undeniable. Each test showed slightly more drift than the previous one. The AI's compensation algorithms were learning, adapting, masking the underlying flaw. But the flaw remained, accumulating like metal fatigue in an airframe. Invisible until catastrophic failure. Garrett opened a blank document and began writing. Not a formal report, he had no authority for that. Just a clear technical explanation of what the logs showed, what would happen under full 6 aircraft stress, and why waypoints 7 and 8 represented critical failure points. He wrote it anonymously, clinical and precise, the way he used to write post-flight analysis reports, when his opinions carried weight. When he finished, he saved it to a thumb drive, erased all traces from his laptop, and slipped the drive into his pocket. Tomorrow morning, before anyone arrived, he'd leave it on Victoria Harrington's desk. No name, no signature, just the data and the warning. Some things mattered more than staying invisible. "Dad?" Harper's voice pulled him back. He turned from the stove to find her watching him with that too perceptive expression. "Yeah, sweetheart. You look worried. Like really worried. Not just work stress worried." Garrett turned off the burner and sat beside her on the couch. Just thinking about some technical stuff. Nothing for you to worry about. Is it about flying? The question landed with the precision of a targeting system. Why would you think that? Harper shrugged, but her eyes stayed locked on his. Because sometimes, when you think I'm not looking, you stare at the sky like you're solving a really hard math problem. And you always know exactly how high planes are flying when they go over. And last week, I Googled your name, and there's nothing about you before I was born. Like you didn't exist. That means something bad happened, right? Garrett's throat tightened. 9 years old, and she'd already figured out more than most adults ever would. He'd known this conversation would come eventually, but he'd hoped for a few more years of simple answers. Yeah, something bad happened. I had to make a choice between being right about something and being your dad. I chose you. Harper leaned against him, her small frame fitting perfectly under his arm the way it had since she was tiny. Mom would say, "You chose right." How do you know? Because she chose us too. She told me before she died. Garrett's heart stuttered. You were 9 months old when she died. I know, but I remember her voice sometimes. And I found her letters. What letters? Harper pulled away, disappeared into her room, and returned with a small wooden box Garrett recognized from their bedroom closet. Inside were 3 sealed envelopes, each labeled with a different age. For Harper at age 10, for Harper at age 16, for Harper at age 18. There was a 4th envelope at the bottom, unsealed. Garrett's hand shook as he pulled it out and unfolded the single page covered in Claire's familiar handwriting. My love, by now I'm gone. I know you've given up the sky for us, for me during treatment, for Harper after I'm not there to help. I need you to know, you didn't give up flying. You flew for us. Every day you chose us over pride, over glory, over ego. That was the highest flight of all. When the moment comes, and it will, fly again. Not away from us, through us. Harper needs a father who shows her that falling doesn't mean you can't soar again. I love you. Always. Claire Garrett read it 3 times, tears blurring the words. Harper watched him with Claire's eyes, waiting. She knew, Garrett finally managed. Even at the end, she knew I'd need to hear this. Are you going to fly again? The question carried no judgment. Just curiosity and something that might have been hope. Garrett folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. I don't know. Maybe not in a cockpit, but maybe in other ways. That sounds mysterious and philosophical. Harper laughed, the sound breaking the tension. Like you, Dad. You're full of mysteries. They ate dinner while Harper explained her satellite deployment mechanism in detail that would make most aerospace engineers proud. Garrett listened and asked questions and tried not to think about the thumb drive in his pocket, or the conversation with Elena, or the way Victoria Harrington's eyes had tracked his movement during the alarm test. At 8:30, Harper kissed him goodnight and headed to bed. Garrett cleaned the kitchen, made Harper's lunch for tomorrow, and sat in the darkness of their living room with Claire's letter in his hands. Fly again. Not away from us. Through us. He didn't sleep that night. At 5:15 the next morning, Garrett arrived at Apex Tactical Systems in the pre-dawn darkness. His badge scan echoed in the empty atrium. He took the elevator to the executive floor, walked the silent corridors to Victoria's office, and placed the thumb drive on her desk with a handwritten note on a plain index card. Check waypoints 7 to 8 under full load. Timing cascade will fail. Someone who's seen this before. He was back in his own office before 6, buried in routine work, when his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown internal extension. My office, 9 a.m., VH Victoria. Harrington's office occupied a corner with views of both downtown Denver and the mountains beyond. 3 walls of floor-to-ceiling glass. 1 wall of displays showing real-time metrics from every department. No personal photographs, no decorative elements. Just information, constantly updated, rigorously verified. Garrett arrived at exactly 9 o'clock. Victoria sat behind her desk, the thumb drive beside her keyboard, his handwritten note in her hand. She studied him with the same analytical attention she'd given her presentation metrics. Close the door. He did. How long were you a pilot? The question bypassed all pretense. Garrett considered lying, considered walking out, considered any response that didn't crack open the carefully sealed container holding his past. But Claire's words echoed, "When the moment comes, fly again. 12 years. Test pilot, last 6 years. Where? Naval Air Station, Patuxent River, Edwards Air Force Base. Deployed operations I can't discuss." Victoria opened a file on her computer, turned the screen toward him. It showed his background check from 8 years ago, the one that showed absolutely nothing before his application to Apex. Standard employment verification, spotless, and completely hollow. 9 years of nothing, Victoria said quietly. No tax records, no credit activity, no employment verification, no digital footprint. Just a gap labeled extended family leave with no supporting documentation. Garrett said nothing. I pulled in a favor with an old Navy contact, asked about pilots named Garrett Cross. She turned her screen back, pulled up another file. This one showed a congressional testimony archive. Her finger pointed to a single line. Incident involving personnel subsequently removed from service. You were court-martialed. It wasn't a question. Garrett's jaw tightened. I was given a choice. Accept immediate retirement with complete erasure of service records or face 12 years in military prison for unauthorized deviation from autonomous system protocols that resulted in death. What happened? Garrett's voice was flat, clinical. 9 years ago. Persian Gulf. 4 F-35s in formation training. Timing synchronization drift in the autonomous coordination system. 0.4 milliseconds accumulated lag. Everything reading green. I saw the pattern developing. Warned my wingman over comms. He followed protocol. Trusted the system. 2 aircraft collided. Lieutenant Brennan Masters died. I overrode manually and survived. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. The Navy blamed you. The Navy needed someone to blame who wasn't a $200 billion autonomous coordination program. Human error is easier to prosecute than systemic failure. And you had a family. My wife was 6 weeks pregnant. I chose them over vindication. Victoria closed the files, folded her hands on the desk. Dr. Masters is the lead architect on Atlas. Her husband was Lieutenant Brennan Masters. He died in a training accident 9 years ago. Autonomous system failure during formation flight. The words hit like G-forces, crushing and disorienting. Garrett's vision narrowed. Elena's husband. The woman who'd spent 17 years building perfect autonomous systems to ensure no one else died the way Brennan had. The woman who'd been working 2 feet away from the pilot the Navy had blamed for making her a widow. She doesn't know, Garrett managed. No. And I'm not sure she should. Not yet. Victoria stood, walked to her window wall overlooking the mountains. I lost my brother 11 years ago. Training accident, instructor error. He was 22, a pilot cadet who trusted the person teaching him to fly. My father, Admiral Richard Harrington, retired, was the investigating officer. He ruled it pilot error. Michael's error. Rather than admit the instructor made a mistake that the Navy should have caught in certification. I'm sorry. Victoria turned back. I built this company on the belief that systems could eliminate human weakness, that data and algorithms could protect people from the failures that cost my brother his life. But standing here, looking at your analysis of the Atlas logs, I realize I've been building the same lie that killed him, just with better technology. She returned to her desk, pulled up the Atlas demonstration schedule. 6 days from now, 6 aircraft, 15 waypoints, live evaluation by Pentagon procurement. If it succeeds, Apex wins a $3.2 billion contract. If it fails, people die. Garrett finished, and your company collapses. Victoria met his eyes. I'm postponing the demonstration. The board won't allow it. Then the board can remove me. Some things matter more than quarterly earnings. Garrett felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest, something that might have been hope, or might have been the first crack in 8 years of carefully maintained resignation. Why are you doing this? Because 9 years ago, you chose your daughter over your career. Today, I'm choosing integrity over mine. She paused. And because I need someone who understands the difference between acceptable parameters and actual safety. I'm creating a new position, Director of Safety Systems Integration. You'll review all critical projects, identify failure modes, provide recommendations before problems become crises. No public profile, no testimony, no media. You work your schedule. You leave when you need to for Harper. And you're paid enough to never worry about making rent again. Why would you trust me? Because you walked away from everything to protect your daughter, then came back when you saw people were in danger. That's the kind of judgment this company needs. That's the kind of judgment I need. Garrett looked out at the mountains, at the sky that had once been his entire world. I'm not that person anymore. The pilot who flew those missions doesn't exist. I'm not asking you to be Ghost 7. I'm asking you to use what you learned without sacrificing what you chose. Ghost 7. The call sign he hadn't heard spoken aloud in 8 years. Victoria had dug deeper than background checks and congressional testimony. She'd found his operational designation, the identity that had been sealed under national security directives. How did you... I have my own secrets, Mr. Cross, and my own reasons for making sure the truth matters more than convenience. Garrett thought about Harper, about Claire's letter, about Lieutenant Brennan Masters dying because a system couldn't recognize its own failure. He thought about the pilot he'd been and the father he'd become, and the possibility that maybe those two things didn't have to be mutually exclusive. I need to be home by 6 every night. No exceptions. Harper comes first. Victoria extended her hand. Ironclad policy, written into your contract. Garrett shook it and felt the weight of 8 years shift without disappearing entirely. Then I accept. The announcement came through official channels at 10 the next morning. Garrett Cross, formerly Facility Systems Coordinator, was now Director of Safety Systems Integration, reporting directly to the CEO. His first assignment, comprehensive review of the Atlas Autonomous Flight Network before Pentagon demonstration. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Dr. Elena Masters sent a company-wide email within 20 minutes, her words precise and cutting. While I respect Ms. Harrington's authority to make personnel decisions, elevating maintenance staff to positions requiring advanced technical expertise sets a concerning precedent. Atlas has undergone rigorous validation. Further delays based on unqualified analysis jeopardize our competitive position and contractual obligations. Garrett read it twice, then archived it without responding. Elena was protecting her work, defending the system she'd built as a memorial to her dead husband. He understood that impulse better than she knew. His new office occupied a corner of the engineering floor, smaller than Victoria's, but with the same floor-to-ceiling windows. The furniture was standard corporate issue, but someone had stocked the desk with technical specifications for every active Apex project. Garrett spent the morning reviewing Atlas documentation, cross-referencing test logs, building a comprehensive analysis of the timing drift pattern. By noon, he'd identified 3 additional failure modes the simulations had missed. He was documenting the second one when his door opened without warning. A man in his early 60s stood in the doorway, salt and pepper hair cut military short, posture that screamed decades of service. He wore civilian clothes, khakis and a polo shirt, but carried himself like someone who'd commanded troops in hostile territory. Colonel Raymond Thorne, retired. The man extended his hand. Though I suppose it's just Raymond now. Been consulting for Apex about 6 months. Heard we had new blood in safety oversight. Garrett shook his hand, noting the calluses consistent with someone who still flew recreationally. What can I do for you, Colonel? Raymond. And it's more what I can do for you. He closed the door, settled into the chair across from Garrett's desk without invitation. I flew Hornets for 23 years. Test pilot for the last 8. Been around enough autonomous systems to know when someone spots a problem everyone else wants to ignore. You've reviewed the Atlas logs. Didn't need to. I was in the simulation bay yesterday when you tried warning Dr. Masters. Audio monitoring caught the whole conversation. Raymond leaned forward. I also know who you are, Ghost 7. Or who you used to be. Garrett's hand stilled on his keyboard. That call sign is classified. So is the incident that earned it for you. But I was the liaison officer coordinating with the Navy when they were trying to figure out what the hell happened over the Persian Gulf. I read the real after-action reports before they got sanitized for the court-martial. You tried to save Lieutenant Masters. The system killed him. Not you. Then you know more than most people who were actually there. Raymond's expression softened. I also know you've been working 2 floors below me for 8 months, keeping your head down, doing inventory work you could do in your sleep. Takes discipline to stay invisible that long. Most pilots I knew couldn't manage it for 8 days. I had reasons. Your daughter. Raymond nodded. I did my research after Victoria promoted you. Harper Cross, age 9, student at Riverside Academy. Smart kid, science fair project on satellite deployment mechanisms. Garrett's protective instincts flared. My daughter isn't relevant to Atlas safety. Didn't say she was. But she's relevant to why you care about getting it right. You've got something to fly home to. That makes you more careful than people who only have careers to lose. The observation landed with unexpected accuracy. Garrett saved his work, closed his laptop. Why are you here, Colonel? Because in 6 days, Apex is going to put 6 autonomous aircraft through coordinated maneuvers that'll stress test every failure mode in the system. And because Dr. Masters is brilliant, but she's got a blind spot the size of the Persian Gulf when it comes to trusting AI over human judgment, she needs someone who can see what she can't. You're that someone. She won't listen to me. She thinks I'm maintenance staff playing engineer. Then we make her listen. Raymond pulled a tablet from his bag, called up a simulation interface. I've got access to the Atlas test environment. We run your worst case scenario, document exactly what happens at waypoint 7 and 8, present the data in a way even the board can't ignore. Victoria already postponed the demonstration, and the board is meeting this afternoon to override her. Your new boss is about to get outvoted 7-1 unless we give her ammunition she can use. Garrett studied the older man, weighing risks and possibilities. You're putting your consulting contract at risk, helping me. I'm 61 years old with a pension and more money than I need. I can afford to do the right thing. Raymond met his eyes. Question is whether you can. Because if we do this, you're going to have to stand in front of people and explain how you know what you know. No more hiding behind inventory reports. The thought made Garrett's chest tighten, but Claire's words echoed in his mind. Fly again. Through us, not away from us. Run the simulation. They worked through lunch, Raymond's access credentials bypassing the restrictions that would have flagged Garrett's activity. The simulation environment replicated the planned demonstration with precision. 6 Atlas drones, 15 waypoints across a 200-mile course, dynamic threat responses, coordinated weapon employment. Everything the Pentagon evaluators would observe, compressed into virtual space. Raymond initialized the scenario. Garrett monitored the timing synchronization logs, watching microseconds accumulate into milliseconds. Waypoint 5 showed drift at 0.19 milliseconds. Waypoint 6 hit 0.41. At waypoint 7, the cascade began. Aircraft 2 and 5 converged on the same spatial coordinates from different vectors. The AI's compensation algorithms attempted correction, but the timing lag meant each aircraft was responding to position data that was already outdated. The virtual drones spiraled into each other at a combined closure rate exceeding 600 knots. The simulation froze with a red warning. Collision detected. Mission failure. Raymond replayed it in slow motion, capturing every data point. The math doesn't lie. Under full coordination stress, the timing drift becomes catastrophic right where you predicted. Now we show this to Elena. She'll say the simulation environment doesn't match the real flight parameters. Then we run it with her watching. Make her see it happen in real time. They found Elena in her office, surrounded by displays showing Atlas subsystem diagnostics. She looked up when they entered, her expression cooling several degrees when she saw Garrett. "Dr. Masters," Raymond began, "we need 10 minutes of your time. I'm preparing for the board meeting, Colonel. Unless this is urgent." "It's urgent. We've identified a critical failure mode in the Atlas coordination system." Elena's jaw tightened. "Mr. Cross has already shared his concerns. I've addressed them in my technical review. The timing drift is within acceptable parameters and fully compensated by adaptive algorithms." Garrett stepped forward, keeping his voice level. "We'd like to run a simulation in your presence. Full demonstration scenario, 6 aircraft, all 15 waypoints. If the system performs as designed, we'll document that and withdraw our concerns. And if it doesn't, then we have 6 days to fix it before the Pentagon watches it fail in real life." Elena studied them both, then checked her watch. "You have 8 minutes before I need to leave for the board meeting. Run your simulation." Raymond pulled up the scenario on Elena's main display. Garrett provided the commentary, explaining each waypoint, each increment of timing drift, each moment where compensation algorithms masked the underlying problem. Elena watched in silence, her expression unreadable. At waypoint 7, the collision warning flashed. 2 virtual aircraft occupied the same space. Mission failure. Elena stared at the screen for 15 seconds of absolute silence. Then she pulled up the simulation logs, began analyzing the timing data with furious intensity. This can't be right. We've run this scenario 18 times without collision. With different random seed values, Garrett said quietly. The timing drift accumulation depends on initial conditions. Some seeds mask it, some expose it. We just ran the scenario with conditions matching the weather forecast for demonstration day. Elena's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up historical test data, comparing timing signatures. Her face went pale. The pattern's been there all along. We just never stressed it under these exact conditions. Because your test protocols randomized the variables, Raymond added. Standard practice for simulation validation. But it meant you never hit the specific combination that triggers cascade failure. Elena looked at Garrett, and for the first time since he'd met her, the professional armor cracked. How did you know to look for this? Because I've seen this exact failure signature before. In a different system, different aircraft, same fundamental flaw. And I watched someone die because nobody believed it could happen outside the parameters. The board meeting lasted 3 hours. Garrett wasn't invited, but Victoria messaged him updates throughout. The board wanted to proceed with the demonstration on schedule. Elena presented the simulation results, explaining the failure mode with technical precision that should have convinced any rational decision-maker. It convinced 2 board members. The other 6 voted to continue as planned, citing contractual obligations, competitive pressure, and Elena's own previous assurances that Atlas was thoroughly validated. Admiral Richard Harrington, Victoria's father and board member, led the opposition with arguments about investment costs and maintenance worker credibility. Final vote, 7-1 in favor of proceeding. Victoria was given 48 hours to either green-light the demonstration or face a vote of no confidence in her leadership. She came to Garrett's office at 6:15, after he should have left, but before he'd actually managed to walk away. Her professional composure was intact, but exhaustion showed in the tightness around her eyes. They're removing me if I don't comply. Interim CEO will be announced Friday. Probably James Weston. He'll proceed with the demonstration regardless. Garrett closed his laptop, thought about Harper waiting at home, thought about Lieutenant Brennan Masters, who trusted a system that had killed him. Then what do? We fix the system in 6 days. Or we find a way to stop the demonstration. Victoria leaned against his doorframe. Elena's running diagnostics now. She believes us about the failure mode, even if she won't say it publicly. But fixing timing synchronization in a distributed AI network isn't like replacing a circuit board. It requires fundamental architecture changes. How long would that take? Conservatively, 3 months. Aggressively, 6 weeks. She paused. We have 6 days. Then we need to make the board see what we see. Run the demonstration as a closed test first. Show them the failure in controlled conditions. I suggested that. They said controlled tests don't satisfy Pentagon requirements. The evaluators need to see live flight operations, not simulations. Garrett stood, paced to his window overlooking the parking lot. What if someone went public, leaked the simulation results to aviation safety boards, defense oversight committees? Victoria shook her head. Without classified details, it's just speculation. And leaking would destroy Apex faster than a failed demonstration. We'd lose every government contract, face criminal charges for unauthorized disclosure. So we're trapped. Fix the unfixable in 6 days, or watch it fail and hope nobody dies. There's a third option. Victoria's voice was quiet. You could walk away. Take the severance package. Protect yourself and Harper. Nobody would blame you for choosing her over this fight. Garrett thought about that, about disappearing back into inventory management, letting someone else carry the weight of knowing what would happen. It would be easier, safer, the smart choice for a father whose only job was protecting his daughter. But Claire's voice wouldn't let him. Fly again. Through us. I'm not walking away. Then we worked the problem. Victoria straightened, some of her command presence returning. Elena's team will focus on software patches, anything that can reduce timing drift without full architecture redesign. You and Raymond develop contingency protocols for manual override during the demonstration. If the system starts failing, we need a way to recover before collision. Manual override requires Pentagon authorization. They won't grant that for a demonstration. Then we prepare it anyway and deploy it the second we detect cascade failure. Better to save lives and face criminal charges than watch people die following protocol. Garrett recognized the logic. It was the same calculation he'd made 9 years ago over the Persian Gulf. Override and survive, but face court-martial. Or trust the system and die following orders. He'd chosen survival and lost everything except Harper. This time, maybe he could choose both. The next 4 days blurred into exhaustion. Garrett arrived at 6 each morning, left promptly at 6 each evening, and worked from home until Harper went to bed at 8:30. Elena's team ran continuous diagnostic cycles, tweaking compensation algorithms, adjusting timing buffers, testing every possible software mitigation. Each iteration reduced the drift by fractions of milliseconds, not enough to eliminate the cascade risk, but enough to push the failure threshold from waypoint 7 to waypoint 9. Raymond worked with Garrett developing manual override protocols, quietly securing authorization codes through Pentagon contacts who remembered when human judgment had saved missions that automation had endangered. They built a ground control interface that could assume command of all 6 aircraft simultaneously if timing drift exceeded critical thresholds. The board never knew. Victoria authorized the work under her existing CEO authority, betting her career that she could hold her position long enough to either fix Atlas or prove it needed fixing. On the 3rd day, Garrett made it home at 5:58 to find Harper in the kitchen with Mrs. Patterson, her science fair project spread across the table. The satellite deployment mechanism had progressed from concept to functional model, a precise miniature that demonstrated staging sequences with elegant simplicity. "This is incredible, kiddo." Harper beamed. Mrs. Patterson helped with the electrical wiring. I did the physics calculations and mechanical design. The neighbor, a retired engineer in her 70s, smiled. "Your daughter understands orbital mechanics better than most college students. She's going to win this fair. She gets it from her mother." Garrett ruffled Harper's hair. "When's your presentation?" "Tomorrow, at 6. She hesitated. "Will you be there?" The question carried no accusation, just the learned uncertainty of a child whose father worked irregular hours in a demanding job. Garrett knelt beside her chair. "I'll be there at 5:45, front row. Nothing could make me miss this. Even if work is busy, especially if work is busy, you matter more than any project, any deadline, any crisis, always." Harper hugged him, fierce and trusting. "Okay, I believe you." That night, after Harper slept and Mrs. Patterson had gone home, Garrett sat in the darkness of their living room with his laptop open to the Atlas override protocols. The demonstration was in 3 days. Elena's software patches had brought marginal improvements, but the fundamental flaw remained. Under worst-case conditions, the system would still cascade into failure somewhere between waypoint 8 and 10. His phone buzzed, message from Victoria, board meeting tomorrow 9 a.m., vote of no confidence, Thought you should know. He typed back, "What do you need from me?" Her response came immediately. "Keep Harper safe. Keep doing what you believe is right. That's enough." Garrett stared at those words for a long time. Victoria was about to lose her company defending a position based on his analysis, protecting people from a danger most of them didn't believe existed. She was choosing integrity over survival, just like she'd asked him to do, just like Claire had asked him to do in that letter. The next morning, Harper's science fair presentation drew a crowd. Her explanation of orbital mechanics and deployment sequences held adults and children equally transfixed. She demonstrated the staging mechanism flawlessly, answered questions with confidence, and won first place in the middle school category. Garrett watched from the front row, exactly where he'd promised to be, and felt something shift in his chest. This was what mattered. This moment, this child, this proof that the choices he'd made had protected something worth protecting. But as he applauded with the other parents, his phone vibrated. Message from Raymond. Board voted 7-1. Victoria out as CEO effective immediately. Weston taking over. Demonstration proceeding as scheduled. You're fired effective end of day. Garrett's hands tightened on his phone. Harper noticed. "Dad, you okay?" He forced a smile. "I'm perfect. You were amazing up there. Did something bad happen at work? Nothing that matters more than watching you win first place?" But Harper wasn't fooled. She studied him with those two perceptive eyes, then took his hand. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. That's what we do." Walking to the car, Garrett's phone rang. Victoria's number. "I'm sorry," she said without preamble. "I tried to hold the line. The board wouldn't budge. It's not your fault. You did everything you could. Weston's already announced your termination. Security will escort you out when you return to the building." She paused. "But Garrett, the override protocols are still in the system. Raymond has access codes. If the demonstration starts cascading, you'll have options. Options that could save lives and guarantee prosecution. Better than the alternative. Victoria, the board made their choice. You don't have to keep fighting." Her laugh was bitter. "My father spent his career choosing protocol over truth. I watched it kill my brother and destroy good people. I'm not making that same choice." She paused. "Raymond's still consulting through the weekend. He'll be at the demonstration. Whatever happens, you won't be alone." The call ended. Garrett sat in his car outside Riverside Academy, watching Harper through the windshield as she showed her first-place ribbon to a classmate. 9 years old, and already brilliant, already kind, already everything her mother had been. He could walk away, take Harper home, ignore the demonstration, let Atlas succeed or fail without his intervention. Nobody would blame him. He'd already lost his job, already sacrificed enough. But Lieutenant Brennan Masters had died trusting a system that had betrayed him, and somewhere in Apex's engineering labs, Elena was probably still running diagnostics, still trying to fix the unfixable, still believing that autonomous systems could be perfected enough to honor her husband's memory. Garrett pulled out his phone, texted Raymond, "I'm coming to the demonstration. What do I need?" The response came in seconds. "Authorization codes and courage. I'll provide the first. You've already got the second." Harper climbed into the passenger seat, still clutching her ribbon. "Where to now, Dad?" "Home. We got some things to talk about." That night, Garrett told his daughter everything. About flying, about the Persian Gulf, about the choice he'd made to be her father instead of vindicating himself, about the system that was about to be demonstrated and the people who might die if it failed. Harper listened with the same focused intensity she'd brought to her science fair project. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Are you going to stop it?" "I don't know if I can, but I have to try, even though you might get in trouble, especially because people's lives matter more than staying out of trouble." Harper nodded slowly. "Mom's letter said you'd know when it was time to fly again. I think this is that time." She was 9 years old and wiser than most adults Garrett had ever known. He pulled her into a hug. "When did you get so smart?" "I get it from you and Mom." Harper pulled back, looked up at him seriously. "But Dad, whatever happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you. Not for the flying stuff, for choosing to do the right thing even when it's hard." The demonstration was scheduled for 10 in the morning, 2 days away. Garrett had 48 hours to prepare for a choice that might save lives or destroy what remained of his freedom. But for now, he had Harper and Claire's words and the memory of what it felt like to trust his instincts even when every protocol said otherwise. Some flights couldn't be avoided. Some were worth the risk. The morning of the demonstration arrived with cloudless skies and winds out of the northwest at 12 knots. Perfect flying weather. Perfect conditions for catastrophe. Garrett woke at 4:30, unable to sleep past the anxiety that had been building for 48 hours. He made coffee in the darkness of their kitchen, watched the Denver skyline emerge from shadow into dawn, and tried not to calculate the odds of what he was about to attempt. The math didn't favor survival, professional, legal, or otherwise. Harper found him at 5:15, earlier than her usual wake-up time. She sat beside him at the kitchen table without speaking, her presence a quiet anchor. They'd talked through everything last night, the risks, the consequences, the possibility that her father might face criminal charges for what he was planning. She listened with the same serious attention she brought to complex physics problems, then said something that had nearly broken him. "I'd rather have a dad who does the right thing and gets in trouble than a dad who stays safe and lets people die." 9 years old, and she already understood what some adults spent lifetimes avoiding. "You don't have to go to school today," Garrett said quietly. "Mrs. Patterson can stay with you. I want to go." Harper's voice was steady. "Staying home won't change what happens, and you taught me that worry doesn't solve problems. Action does." "When did I teach you that?" "Every single day. Every time you showed up, even when things were hard. Every time you kept going when you could have quit." Garrett pulled her into a hug, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, memorizing the weight of her in his arms. "Whatever happens today, I love you more than anything in this world. You know that, right?" "I know." Harper squeezed tighter. "And I love you. Even if you have to go away for a while." The possibility sat between them, unspoken but real. If the demonstration cascaded and Garrett intervened without authorization, he'd face federal charges: unauthorized access to military systems, interference with defense contracts, potentially criminal negligence if his override caused problems. The Navy had offered him that exact choice 9 years ago: prison or erasure. This time, they might not offer the second option. But Lieutenant Brennan Masters would still be dead, and 6 Atlas aircraft were about to stress the same system flaw that had killed him. Some choices weren't really choices at all. Garrett dropped Harper at school at 7:40, earlier than usual. She kissed his cheek before climbing out of the car, her backpack decorated with aerospace patches and physics equations she'd drawn in marker. "Dad?" She paused at the door. "Fly safe." The words hit like a gut punch. That's what Claire used to say before every deployment, every test flight, every mission that might not bring him home. Harper had been 9 months old when her mother died. She couldn't possibly remember that phrase, unless Claire had written it in one of those sealed letters. "I will, kiddo. I promise." He watched until she disappeared into the building, counted to 10 like always, then drove toward Apex Tactical Systems and whatever waited there. The observation deck at Apex's test facility north of Denver resembled a small theater, tiered seating facing floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the runway. 50 chairs arranged in neat rows, each equipped with a tablet showing real-time telemetry. This morning, every seat was occupied. Pentagon procurement officers in uniform, defense contractors in expensive suits, 2 senators from the Armed Services Committee, a 3-star general whose name Garrett recognized from classified operations. James Weston, Apex's new interim CEO, worked the room like a politician, shaking hands and projecting confidence. Dr. Elena Masters stood beside the primary control console, surrounded by her engineering team, her expression focused but tense. Victoria Harrington sat in the back row, technically still a shareholder but no longer welcome in her own company. She'd texted Garrett earlier, "I'll be there, even if they try to remove me. Some things are worth witnessing." Garrett wasn't on the guest list. Security had his photo flagged for immediate ejection if he attempted entry, but Raymond Thorne had credentials that opened doors, and Raymond had made it clear that his technical observer would be accompanying him regardless of corporate politics. They arrived at 8:15, 90 minutes before scheduled launch. Security stopped them at the entrance. "Colonel Thorne is approved," the guard said, checking his tablet. "But Mr. Cross is no longer employed by Apex. I can't authorize. He's my guest under Department of Defense Oversight Authority." Raymond's voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Unless you want to explain to General Morrison why you interfered with Pentagon evaluation procedures, you'll let us both through." The guard hesitated, called his supervisor, made the correct calculation about career risk versus corporate policy. They were cleared. The observation deck hummed with conversation and anticipation. Garrett followed Raymond to seats in the technical section, away from the VIPs but with clear sight lines to the control console. Elena saw them enter. Her expression flickered. Surprise, anger, something that might have been relief, before returning to professional neutrality. James Weston noticed too. He crossed the room with the purposeful stride of someone about to make a scene. "Colonel Thorne, I wasn't aware you'd be bringing unauthorized personnel, Mr. Cross is no longer associated with Apex and has no clearance for this demonstration. Mr. Cross is my technical consultant for evaluation purposes." Raymond didn't stand, didn't acknowledge the implied authority. Unless you're planning to override Pentagon observation protocols, he stays. Weston's jaw tightened. "If there are any irregularities during this demonstration, then I'm sure your engineering team will handle them professionally." Raymond turned away, dismissing the CEO without further acknowledgement. Weston stood there for 3 seconds, calculating whether escalation was worth the political cost, then retreated to his VIP seating. "Subtle," Garrett murmured. "Retired colonels don't do subtle. We do effective." Raymond pulled out his tablet, opened an interface that showed system access Garrett recognized as the manual override protocols they'd built. "This is keyed to my biometrics and yours. If timing drift exceeds critical thresholds, we can assume control. But Garrett, once we trigger this, there's no walking it back. Federal charges, probably military tribunal given the classified nature of the systems involved. I understand. Do you?" Because I've got a pension and no dependents. You've got a 9-year-old daughter who needs her father. Garrett thought about Harper's words that morning. I'd rather have a dad who does the right thing. He thought about Claire's letter. He thought about Brennan Masters trusting a system that had killed him because protocol said trust was required. If I don't act and people die, Harper loses her father anyway, just to a different kind of prison. Raymond nodded slowly, then we're committed. He glanced toward the control console where Elena was running pre-flight checks. Any chance Dr. Masters pulls the plug herself? She spent 8 years building this system to honor her husband's memory. Admitting it's flawed means admitting she's been wrong about the thing that gave his death meaning. Garrett paused. People don't let go of that kind of belief easily, even when the evidence is undeniable, especially then. At 9:30, James Weston stepped to the podium positioned at the front of the observation deck. His voice carried the practiced enthusiasm of someone selling vision rather than reality. Distinguished guests, thank you for joining us for this historic demonstration of the Atlas Autonomous Flight Network. What you're about to witness represents the future of military aviation. 6 unmanned aircraft coordinated through advanced artificial intelligence, capable of executing complex missions with precision and efficiency that exceed human limitations. This system will save lives, reduce costs, and provide our military with capabilities our adversaries cannot match. Polite applause from the assembled crowd. Garrett's hands stayed motionless in his lap. Dr. Elena Masters will now walk us through the demonstration profile. Elena stepped forward, and despite everything, despite knowing her husband had died to the same system flaw she'd been unable to see, Garrett felt a flicker of sympathy. She believed in this. She needed it to work. The alternative was too painful to accept. Thank you, Mr. Weston. Elena's voice was steady, professional. Today's demonstration consists of 6 Atlas aircraft executing a coordinated flight profile across 200 nautical miles. The route includes 15 waypoints with varying complexity, simple navigation, threat response scenarios, coordinated weapon employment simulations, and dynamic formation changes. The aircraft will be entirely autonomous from takeoff through landing. No human intervention will occur unless safety protocols require abort. She pulled up a map showing the flight path overlaid across northern Colorado and southern Wyoming. Weather conditions are optimal. All aircraft systems show green across all parameters. Estimated flight time is 42 minutes from launch to final landing. A senator raised his hand. Dr. Masters, what safeguards exist if the system encounters unexpected conditions? The Atlas AI is trained on over 10,000 hours of simulated flight conditions, including weather extremes, equipment failures, and threat scenarios beyond what we expect today. The system adapts in real time, compensating for variables without requiring pre-programmed responses. Additionally, we have manual override capabilities if the engineering team determines intervention is necessary. But no manual pilots in the loop during normal operations? Correct. The entire purpose of Atlas is to eliminate human latency and decision-making errors. Our testing has demonstrated that autonomous systems perform more reliably than human pilots across virtually every metric. Garrett's jaw tightened. Every metric except the one where humans recognized patterns the simulations hadn't anticipated. Every metric except survival when systems failed outside their training parameters. Raymond's hand moved to his tablet, fingers resting on the override interface. Ready? As much as possible. At 9:55, the 6 Atlas aircraft sat on the runway in staggered formation, Sleek delta wing designs, each equipped with sensor packages and weapon simulators, painted in the matte gray that made them nearly invisible against certain sky conditions. Beautiful machines, engineering marvels, potential coffins for anyone unlucky enough to be near them when the timing cascade triggered. Elena's team ran final pre-flight checks. Green lights cascaded across the control console. Every system nominal, every parameter within tolerance. The simulation results Garrett and Raymond had documented might as well have never existed. Launch authorization approved, Elena announced, initiating automated takeoff sequence in 60 seconds. The observation deck fell silent except for the quiet hum of climate control and the subdued clicking of tablets recording data. Garrett watched the aircraft through the windows, watched the telemetry on Raymond's screen, watched Elena's profile as she monitored systems she'd spent 8 years perfecting. In 10 seconds, she'd launch 6 aircraft into a flight profile that would cascade into catastrophic failure somewhere between waypoint 8 and 10, and Garrett would have to choose between intervention that could save lives and ruin his, or silence that would preserve his freedom and haunt him forever. 30 seconds to launch. Garrett's phone vibrated in his pocket. Text from Harper, sent during her morning break. Remember, fly safe, and fly through us, not away. Love you, Dad. His throat tightened. 9 years old, and she understood everything that mattered. 15 seconds. Raymond's eyes met his. Last chance to walk away. I'm not walking. Launch sequence initiated. The 6 aircraft accelerated down the runway in perfect synchronization, lifting off at precisely calculated intervals. Their formations assembled mid-climb, transitioning from individual units to coordinated swarm in less than 40 seconds. The observation deck erupted in appreciative murmurs. Even Garrett had to admit it was impressive. The kind of precision that made autonomous systems seductive. Until they failed. Waypoint 1 achieved at 10:03. All systems nominal. Elena's voice carried quiet satisfaction. The telemetry on Raymond's tablet showed timing synchronization at 0.04 milliseconds drift. Within tolerance. Barely noticeable. Exactly where it needed to be at this stage for cascade failure to develop gradually enough that compensation algorithms would mask it until too late. Waypoint 2 at 10:06. Formation transition executed flawlessly. Drift at 0.08 milliseconds. Still green. Still invisible to everyone watching except the 2 people who knew what to look for. Victoria appeared beside them, sliding into an empty seat. Her presence drew sharp looks from James Weston and several board members, but no one challenged her right to observe. She leaned close to Garrett, voice barely audible. Elena ran additional diagnostics last night. Found correlation between the timing drift and environmental variables the simulations hadn't weighted properly. She knows there's risk. Then why didn't she abort? Because Weston and the board made it clear that aborting would mean immediate termination and civil liability for breach of contract. She's trying to thread the needle, proceed with the demonstration while monitoring for the failure mode we identified. That's not threading a needle. That's playing Russian roulette and hoping the cylinder turns up empty. Victoria's expression was grim. I know, but she's out of options. We all are. Waypoint 3 at 10:09. Threat response scenario initiated. The aircraft executed evasive maneuvers, responding to simulated surface-to-air threats with coordinated tactics that would impress any military analyst. They jinked and weaved, deployed countermeasures, repositioned into defensive formation without hesitation or confusion. The AI was performing exactly as designed, drift at 0.15 milliseconds. A senator leaned toward his aide. This is remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. Waypoint 4 at 10:12. Weapon employment simulation beginning. The aircraft locked simulated targets, coordinated firing sequences, maintained formation integrity throughout. Perfect execution. The kind of demonstration that won billion-dollar contracts and changed military doctrine. Drift at 0.23 milliseconds. Garrett's hands started sweating. The pattern was developing exactly as he'd predicted, exactly as it had 9 years ago over the Persian Gulf before two F-35s occupied the same coordinates and Brennan Masters died trusting the system. Raymond's finger hovered over the override interface. How long? Waypoint 7, maybe 8. Depends on how the environmental variables compound. Could be 12 minutes. Could be 6. And if we're wrong, if the cascade doesn't develop, then we've destroyed our credibility for nothing, and Elena's system works better than we thought. Garrett's voice was flat. But we're not wrong. Waypoint 5 at 10:16. Dynamic formation change executed. Drift at 0.36 milliseconds. The needle was moving into yellow territory now. Not critical yet, but accelerating faster than the simulations had predicted. Elena saw it too. Her posture changed, shoulders tensing infinitesimally. She pulled up additional diagnostic screens, fingers moving rapidly across her console. One of her engineers leaned close, said something Garrett couldn't hear. Elena shook her head, pointed to the telemetry. The engineer's expression shifted from curious to concerned. "They see it," Victoria whispered. "They're watching the drift accelerate." "But they won't abort," Raymond said quietly. "Too much riding on this. Too many people watching. Too much ego invested in being right." Waypoint 6 at 10:19. Proximity alert. Caution level. The announcement drew immediate attention from the military observers. A general stood, moved closer to the windows. "What was that alert?" "Standard collision avoidance warning," Elena responded, her voice controlled. Aircraft 2 and 5 moved within cautionary separation distance during the formation change. The AI is compensating, increasing separation to safe parameters. Drift at 0.58 milliseconds. The telemetry showed aircraft 2 and 5 adjusting course, moving apart in response to the proximity warning. But the timing lag meant each aircraft was responding to position data that was already outdated. They were correcting based on where the other had been 0.58 milliseconds ago, not where it was now. At current velocities, 0.58 milliseconds translated to approximately 8 meters of spatial uncertainty. Garrett had seen F-35s pass within 18 meters during the Persian Gulf incident. Wake turbulence had rattled their airframes. Pilots had felt the near miss through their flight controls. 8 meters was half that distance. "Elena, abort the demonstration." Victoria's voice cut through the observation deck's growing tension. Elena didn't turn. "All systems are within parameters. The AI is handling the separation issue. The parameters don't account for timing drift accumulation. You know this. We showed you the simulation. That simulation represented worst-case theoretical conditions." Elena's professional mask was cracking. "What we're seeing now is well within the system's adaptive capabilities." James Weston stood, projecting authority he didn't actually possess. "Ms. Harrington, you are no longer in a position to issue operational directives. Dr. Masters has command of this demonstration." He turned to Elena. "Proceed as planned. Waypoint 7 at 10:22. Drift at 0.71 milliseconds." The acceleration was exponential now, exactly as Garrett's analysis had predicted. The AI's compensation algorithms were fighting the lag. making continuous micro-adjustments that should have worked but didn't, because each adjustment was based on data that was increasingly divorced from reality. Aircraft 2 and 5 were converging again, not rapidly, not obviously, just small course corrections that were supposed to optimize formation efficiency, but were actually walking both aircraft toward the same spatial coordinates from different vectors. Elena's team saw it. The engineers were pulling up every diagnostic tool available, cross-checking telemetry, running real-time simulations. One of them, a young woman with glasses and tired eyes, spoke urgently to Elena. "Dr. Masters, we're seeing cascade indicators matching the failure mode Mr. Cross identified. Recommend we transition to manual override." Elena stared at her screens. "The timing drift is still within adaptive range. The system will compensate. It's not compensating. It's masking. There's a difference. We abort now. We lose the contract. We lose everything we've built. Better than losing lives." The engineer's words hung in the air. Elena's hands trembled on her console. For 3 seconds, she stood frozen between professional survival and moral responsibility. Then she looked at the observation deck full of Pentagon brass and senators and contractors, all watching her, all expecting triumph. She made her choice. Continue to waypoint 8. We'll reassess based on actual performance, not theoretical models. Garrett felt his chest constrict. She couldn't let go. Couldn't admit that the system she'd built to honor her husband's memory was flawed with the same flaw that had killed him. The irony was crushing. Raymond's finger moved closer to the override trigger. "We're out of time. Not yet." Garrett kept his voice level despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "If we trigger before the failure is obvious, they'll say we caused it. We need undeniable evidence that the cascade is happening before we intervene. How close are you willing to cut this?" "As close as necessary. Waypoint 8 at 10:25. Aircraft 2 and 5 proximity alert. Warning level." The observation deck's murmur shifted to alarm. The general who'd stood earlier moved to Elena's console. "Dr. Masters, explain the warning level alert." "Aircraft are within minimum safe separation," Elena said, her voice finally showing strain. "The AI is executing emergency spacing maneuvers, but they're not spacing. They're converging." Elena's screen showed the truth she'd been refusing to see. Aircraft 2 and 5 were on intersecting paths, closing at a combined rate of 700 knots. The timing drift had reached 0.94 milliseconds, enough that each aircraft's compensation maneuvers were making the problem worse instead of better. Drift at 1.12 milliseconds. The cascade had begun. Aircraft 2, designate Atlas 2, received commands from the central AI telling it to bank left and climb 200 feet. But the command was based on Atlas 5's position from 1.12 milliseconds ago. In that time, Atlas 5 had already begun its own maneuver, banking left and climbing 200 feet based on where Atlas 2 had been 1.12 milliseconds earlier. Both aircraft were turning into each other, not away. "Collision warning, 8 seconds." The automated voice from the control console cut through all conversation. 50 people in the observation deck froze. Elena's hands moved frantically across her console, attempting manual override. System locked. The AI won't release control. 7 seconds. "Force the override," the general ordered. "Whatever authorization you need, it's not authorization. The AI is prioritizing mission completion. It thinks it can recover. It can't," Garrett said, loud enough to carry across the deck. He stood, moving toward the control console. "The timing synchronization is corrupted. Every compensation maneuver makes it worse. You need to override now. 6 seconds. Security. James Weston pointed at Garrett. Remove him immediately. 5 seconds. Belay that. Raymond's voice cracked like a whip. He held up his tablet, showing credentials that made the security guards freeze. This man is authorized under DoD safety oversight. Colonel Raymond Thorne, current operational authority. 4 seconds. Dr. Masters, give him access. The general's order overrode everyone else in the room. Elena looked at Garrett, and in her eyes he saw everything. The recognition, the horror, the understanding of who he was and what his presence meant. She'd been working beside the man the Navy had blamed for her husband's death. The man who'd tried to warn her about the exact failure that was happening right now. 3 seconds. She stepped aside. Garrett's hands hit the console. Raymond was already beside him, tablet connected, override codes flowing through. The interface was different from what he'd trained on, but the fundamentals were the same. Find the aircraft, assert control, execute correction. 2 seconds. Atlas 2, emergency bank right, 45 degrees. Execute now. His voice had changed. Not the quiet facility coordinator, not the invisible equipment manager. The command voice of someone who'd flown combat missions and test flights and emergency recoveries when systems failed and protocol became suicide. The voice of Ghost 7. Atlas 5, descend 800 feet. Full power. Execute immediately. 1 second. The aircraft responded, not instantly. There was still lag, still the accumulated delay from timing synchronization failure. But they responded to direct human command faster than they'd responded to the AI's increasingly desperate compensations. Atlas 2 banked hard right. Atlas 5, dove. Their flight paths separated by 11 meters. Wake turbulence from Atlas 5's dive rattled Atlas 2's airframe. Cameras caught it. The visible shake. The near miss that would haunt safety briefings for years. But they passed. The observation deck erupted in chaos. Shouting, accusations, demands for explanation. Garrett ignored all of it. The timing synchronization was systemically corrupted now. All 6 aircraft were unstable, each one's navigation based on increasingly outdated position data from the others. If he didn't fix the root cause, they'd have another near collision at the next waypoint cluster. All Atlas aircraft, this is ground control. Switching to manual coordination. Authorization override Delta Echo 7, acknowledge. 6 automated responses came back, mechanical and identical. Atlas 1 acknowledges. Atlas 2 acknowledges. Through Atlas 6. Garrett's fingers flew across the console. He pulled up telemetry for all 6 aircraft simultaneously, identified the timing synchronization errors, began inputting corrections manually. 1 aircraft at a time, he compensated for the drift the AI couldn't see because it fell within program parameters but exceeded practical safety margins. It was like flying 6 planes simultaneously using only instruments and instincts that shouldn't still exist after 9 years of inventory management and equipment coordination. But muscle memory didn't forget. Pattern recognition didn't fade. The part of him that was Ghost 7 had never actually disappeared. It had just been waiting for a moment that demanded its return. Raymond monitored the corrections, calling out separation distances. Atlas 3 and Atlas 6, you're drifting close. Adjust heading 2 degrees left on 3, 1 degree right on 6. Garrett made the corrections without conscious thought. His hands knew what to do. His mind processed the 6 simultaneous flight paths. the environmental variables, the timing compensations needed to keep metal and fuel from occupying the same coordinates. 2 minutes of absolute focus. 2 minutes where the observation deck fell silent watching a fired equipment manager manually fly 6 autonomous aircraft through a demonstration that was supposed to prove human pilots were obsolete. 2 minutes that proved exactly the opposite. Atlas formation transferring back to autonomous navigation. Timing systems manually recalibrated. You are green for mission completion under human oversight protocol. The AI acknowledged, accepted the corrections, resumed control with the compensated timing parameters. The 6 aircraft stabilized, formation integrity restored, crisis averted. Elena stood frozen at her console, staring at the telemetry. Her engineers clustered around her, equally stunned. James Weston's face had gone pale. The general watched Garrett with an expression that mixed shock and recognition. Victoria was the first to move. She walked to Garrett, looked him in the eyes, said nothing. But her hand found his shoulder and squeezed, acknowledgement, gratitude, solidarity. Raymond powered down his tablet, tucked it away. Well, that was interesting. The remaining waypoints proceeded without incident. Atlas completed the demonstration under what Elena's team carefully logged as enhanced human oversight protocols. The aircraft responded to simulated threats, executed coordinated maneuvers, landed in perfect sequence. A technical success if you ignored the near-catastrophic failure at waypoint 8. When the last aircraft touched down at 11:14, the observation deck remained eerily quiet. No applause, no celebration, just the weight of what everyone had witnessed and what it meant. The general approached Elena first. Dr. Masters, I'm going to need a full technical debrief on the timing synchronization failure and the manual intervention protocols that prevented collision. Elena nodded mutely. Her professional armor had shattered completely. She looked at Garrett, opened her mouth, closed it. What could she say? 9 years of work. Invalidated. 9 years of belief that autonomous systems could prevent the death that had destroyed her world, proven wrong by the man she'd blamed for that death. Then the general turned to Garrett. And I'm going to need to know exactly who you are and how you have the skills to manually coordinate 6 aircraft in a cascade failure scenario. Garrett met his eyes. Lieutenant Garrett Cross, United States Navy, former test pilot, call sign Ghost 7. The general's expression shifted. Ghost 7. That's a classified designation. Was, sir. Sealed under national security directives 9 years ago following a court-martial for unauthorized manual override during autonomous system failure. Persian Gulf operation. The same kind of failure we just witnessed. Yes, sir. Identical signature. Identical outcome when the pilot trusts the system instead of his training. The general looked at Elena, at the control console, at the aircraft now safely on the ground. And you've been working here, how long? 8 years, sir. Equipment coordinator until last week when Ms. Harrington promoted me to safety oversight. Garrett paused. Then the board fired me 2 days ago for raising concerns about the Atlas timing drift. James Weston stepped forward, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. General Morrison, this man had no authorization to intervene in our demonstration. His actions saved lives and prevented a catastrophic failure that would have destroyed your company and killed your contract. The general's voice cut like razors. Mr. Weston, I suggest you step very carefully with your next words. But the unauthorized override was authorized by me under emergency safety protocols. Raymond stepped forward, his retired rank carrying more weight than Weston's interim CEO title would ever have. I had operational authority for this demonstration under Pentagon observation guidelines. Mr. Cross acted under my direct orders. It wasn't entirely true, but it was true enough to provide legal cover, and Raymond was delivering it with the absolute confidence of someone who'd spent 30 years navigating military bureaucracy. The general nodded slowly. Then we'll proceed with debriefing and investigation. No one leaves this facility until I have statements from everyone involved. He turned to the Pentagon procurement officers. The Atlas contract is suspended pending full review of the autonomous coordination systems and implementation of mandatory human oversight protocols. Elena made a small sound, grief or relief or both. Victoria's face remained carefully neutral, but Garrett saw the calculation behind her eyes. Contract suspended wasn't contract canceled. There was still path forward, just not the one Apex had planned. The general's attention returned to Garrett. Lieutenant Cross, I was a captain 9 years ago. I was the JAG investigator assigned to review your court-martial proceedings. Garrett's blood went cold. He remembered that captain. Young, thorough, skeptical of the official narrative that blamed human override for system failure. I recommended dismissal of all charges. My report concluded that you acted appropriately to prevent collision caused by autonomous system malfunction. The general's voice was quiet enough that only Garrett, Raymond, and Victoria could hear. I was overruled by officers who decided protecting the program mattered more than protecting the truth. Why are you telling me this, sir? Because I've spent 9 years watching autonomous systems proliferate across every branch of military aviation. Watched good pilots trained to trust algorithms over instincts. Watched near misses get classified and buried because admitting system failures threatened contracts. He paused. Today, you proved what I've known since the Persian Gulf. Autonomous systems are tools. Humans are pilots. Confuse those roles and people die. Garrett had no response. The validation he'd needed 9 years ago, arriving 9 years too late to prevent the sacrifice of his career, his identity, his life in the sky, but not too late to matter. You'll face questions, the general continued. Probably investigation, possibly criminal referral for the unauthorized access. But Lieutenant Cross, I will testify that your intervention prevented loss of life and that the system failure validates your original concerns from 9 years ago. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. You may still face prosecution, but you won't face it alone. The general straightened. Now let's get this debriefing started. We have a lot of documentation to generate. The next 4 hours blurred into statements and technical analysis and careful reconstruction of exactly what had failed and when. Elena's team provided exhaustive data on the timing synchronization drift. Raymond documented the manual override protocols. Victoria explained the warnings Garrett had raised and the board's decision to ignore them. And Garrett walked through every second of the cascade failure and recovery, translating 9 years of buried expertise into official record. By 3 p.m, he was released with instructions not to leave the state pending further investigation. Raymond drove him back toward Denver, the silence comfortable between two people who just survived something that could have killed others. You okay? Raymond finally asked. Ask me in a week when I know whether I'm going to prison. You're not going to prison. The general will make sure of that. You have more faith in military justice than I do. Raymond smiled slightly. I have more faith in bureaucrats protecting their careers. Admitting you were right 9 years ago means admitting they were wrong. Prosecuting you now means proving they were wrong in public. They'll find a way to quietly validate you and move on. Garrett wanted to believe that, but 9 years of living with the consequences of being right at the wrong time made optimism difficult. His phone had 47 missed calls and twice that many messages, most from reporters who'd somehow already gotten the story. 3 from lawyers offering representation, 1 from Harper's school. Mrs. Patterson had picked her up as arranged. Everything was fine. And 1 from Victoria, sent 2 hours ago. Whatever happens, you did the right thing. That matters more than they want to admit. Raymond dropped him at his apartment building at 4:15. Harper and Mrs. Patterson were in the living room, the TV showing news coverage of the Atlas demonstration. The footage showed the near collision from 3 different angles, played and replayed with expert commentary about autonomous system failures and manual intervention. Harper saw him and ran. Garrett caught her, held her, felt the weight of the day finally settle into his bones. "You saved them," she whispered. "Just like you tried to save Lieutenant Masters before. This time, everyone saw it happen. This time they know you were right." Mrs. Patterson gathered her things quietly, squeezed Garrett's arm on her way out. "You're a good man. Don't let anyone tell you different." Then it was just Garrett and Harper in their small apartment, the news coverage still playing, the world slowly understanding what had happened and what it meant. The news anchor was interviewing an aviation safety expert who explained timing synchronization failures in terms meant for general audiences. The expert kept using the phrase human oversight as essential backup, a complete reversal of the autonomous systems or superior narrative that had dominated military aviation for a decade. One demonstration, one near catastrophic failure, one manual intervention. And suddenly, the conversation had changed. Harper leaned against him, watching the coverage. What happens now? Garrett thought about the general's promise, Raymond's optimism, Victoria's quiet support. He thought about investigations and possible prosecution and the chance, small but real, that he might finally be vindicated for the choice he'd made 9 years ago. "I don't know, kiddo, but whatever happens, we'll handle it together. Like we always do. Like we always do." The sun set over Denver, painting their small apartment in shades of amber and copper. Garrett held his daughter and watched the news coverage and tried not to think too hard about what the next days and weeks might bring. He'd flown again. Not in a cockpit, but in the way that mattered most. Through love, through responsibility, through the choice to act when action cost everything, but inaction cost more. Claire would have been proud, and somewhere in the careful documentation being assembled by Pentagon investigators, in the telemetry records showing exactly how manual intervention had prevented catastrophic collision, in the general's testimony about a court-martial that had sacrificed truth for convenience, somewhere in all of that, maybe vindication was finally possible. But even if it wasn't, Garrett had Harper, and that was still everything. The investigation lasted 11 days. Pentagon officials interviewed everyone who'd witnessed the demonstration. Defense Intelligence Agency reviewed the sealed records from Garrett's court-martial. Aviation safety boards analyzed the timing synchronization failure with the kind of scrutiny that should have happened 9 years ago. And slowly, carefully, the official narrative began to shift. Not publicly, not yet. But in classified briefings and closed-door meetings, people who'd spent a decade promoting autonomous systems as the future of military aviation started acknowledging that human judgment might still matter. Garrett spent those 11 days in a strange limbo, not arrested, but advised not to travel, not charged, but clearly under investigation. Raymond's lawyers handled the technical aspects, parsing authorization protocols, documenting emergency override justification, building the case that Garrett's intervention had prevented loss of life rather than caused system interference. Victoria worked different channels. She'd been removed as CEO, but her father was Admiral Richard Harrington, and despite their estrangement, the Admiral's contacts still opened doors. She made calls, attended meetings, reminded people in carefully chosen words that prosecuting the man who'd saved the Atlas demonstration would raise uncomfortable questions about why his warnings had been ignored. And Elena Masters did something unexpected. She came to Garrett's apartment on the 4th day after the demonstration. Harper answered the door, studied the woman with precocious directness, then called for her father. Garrett found them in an awkward standoff. Elena on the doorstep holding a file folder, Harper blocking entry with the protective instinct of someone who'd learned that visitors sometimes brought trouble. "It's okay, kiddo." Garrett touched Harper's shoulder. "Dr. Masters worked with me at Apex. She's the one whose husband died." Harper's voice was matter-of-fact, not cruel. "In the plane crash you told me about." Elena's composure cracked at the edges. "You told her?" She asked questions. I gave her honest answers. Garrett met Elena's eyes. "Would you like to come in?" They sat in the small living room, while Harper retreated to her bedroom with instructions to work on homework. Elena set the file folder on the coffee table, but didn't open it immediately. Instead, she looked around the apartment, taking in the modest furniture, the refrigerator covered in Harper's drawings, the shelf of aerospace textbooks Garrett had kept from his flying days. "I've been working 2 feet away from you for 8 years. Her voice was quiet. "When Victoria told me who you were, I went back through employee records. You started at Apex 3 months after Brennan died. You've been there the whole time, watching me build systems to prevent the kind of death you supposedly caused. I didn't cause Brennan's death. The same way the Atlas cascade wasn't your fault. We both trusted that systems could be made safe enough to eliminate human error. We were both wrong." Elena's hands tightened in her lap. "I built Atlas because I couldn't accept that Brennan died for nothing. If autonomous systems could be perfected, if we could eliminate human mistakes, then his death would have meaning. It would have purpose. But perfection isn't possible, and pursuing it cost you the ability to see the flaw that could have killed more people." Elena finally opened the file folder. Inside were technical documents, the original after-action reports from the Persian Gulf incident, classification markings partially redacted. I requested these through DoD channels after the demonstration, called in favors, used Brennan's death as justification for access. She pulled out a specific page, handed it to Garrett. "This is the initial incident analysis, before the court-martial proceedings." Garrett read it, his throat tightening with each line. "The preliminary investigation concluded that timing synchronization failure in the autonomous coordination system created spatial conflict between Aircraft 2 and Aircraft 4. Lieutenant Cross's manual override of Aircraft 3 was consistent with emergency procedures and likely prevented his aircraft from joining the collision. Recommendation: system recall and redesign. Further recommendation: commendation for Lieutenant Cross's judgment under emergency conditions." That's not what the court-martial used. No. Elena's voice was bitter. That version got classified and buried. The official report blamed your override for creating the spatial conflict. It blamed human interference with autonomous systems. It blamed you for not trusting the program that killed my husband, because admitting system failure would have cost $200 billion in contracts, because the people making decisions cared more about programs than people. Elena looked at him directly for the first time. "I'm sorry. For the last 9 years. for building systems that repeated the same failure, for not listening when you tried to warn me, for blaming you when you were the only one who tried to save Brennan. Garrett set the document down carefully. Your husband was a good pilot. I tried to reach him on comms, tried to get him to override. He followed protocol because that's what we were trained to do. He trusted the system. That trust killed him. And I've spent 9 years proving that his trust was misplaced by building the same flawed systems. Elena's composure finally broke. She cried quietly. 9 years of grief and anger and misplaced purpose spilling out in Garrett's modest living room. I wanted so badly to believe that perfect systems could prevent more deaths like his. That technology could eliminate the uncertainty that cost me everything. But you were right. I was wrong. And I almost killed people defending my wrongness. Garrett let her cry. Harper emerged from her bedroom, assessed the situation with that too perceptive gaze, and brought Elena a box of tissues without being asked. Elena thanked her, wiped her eyes, managed a trembling smile. You're very kind. My mom died when I was a baby. Harper's voice was gentle. Dad says grief makes people do things that don't make sense. He says the only way through it is to stop running from it and just feel it. Elena looked at Garrett. You taught her that? She taught me. I just finally listened. Harper returned to her room. Elena composed herself, tucked the documents back into the folder. The Pentagon investigators asked me to testify about the Atlas failure and your intervention. I'm going to tell them everything. The timing drift you identified, the warnings I ignored, the simulation results that proved you were right. And I'm going to provide these original incident reports showing that you were scapegoated 9 years ago for the same kind of system failure. That could cost you your career. I don't care. Elena's voice was steady now, purpose replacing grief. Brennan deserves the truth. You deserve vindication. And if my testimony helps prevent another system from killing another pilot, then maybe the last 9 years weren't completely wasted. They won't be kind to you. The defense industry protects its programs. Let them come. Elena stood, straightened her jacket. I've spent 9 years being afraid of the truth. I'm done with that. She left the folder with Garrett, evidence, ammunition, vindication he'd thought would never come. After she was gone, he sat in the quiet apartment and read through the documents 3 times. The preliminary analysis that had been buried, the recommendations that had been ignored, the truth that had been sacrificed for convenience and contracts, and the fiction that autonomous systems were ready to replace human judgment. Harper emerged again, settled beside him on the couch. Is she going to be okay? Eventually. Same as us. Because she stopped running from the grief. Because she stopped running from the truth. Sometimes those are the same thing. On the 11th day, General Morrison called Garrett directly. The investigation is concluded. No criminal charges will be filed. Your intervention is classified as emergency safety override under existing protocols. Authorization was retroactively validated. Garrett sat down, the relief making his legs unsteady. What about the original court-martial? That's more complicated. The findings won't be overturned. Too many political considerations. Too many people who'd be implicated. But there will be a classified addendum to your service record acknowledging that the preliminary investigation's conclusions were accurate. Your discharge will be redesignated from punitive to administrative. Full retirement benefits restored, effective immediately. It wasn't full vindication. The public record would still show a court-martial, still show a pilot who'd been removed from service. But the truth would exist somewhere in the classified archives. People who mattered would know. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. Thank Dr. Masters for her testimony and Colonel Thorne for his advocacy. The general paused. There's one more thing. Apex Tactical Systems has requested Pentagon approval to reinstate you as Director of Safety Systems Integration. The board voted unanimously. Even James Weston supported it. Even Weston? Turns out nearly killing a $3 billion contract makes people reconsider their priorities. The general's tone carried dry humor. Victoria Harrington has also been reinstated as CEO. The board determined that her safety concerns were valid and her removal was precipitous. So I'd be working for Victoria again, under new protocols that mandate human oversight for all autonomous systems. Your job would be implementing those protocols across Apex's entire project portfolio. Significant authority, significant salary, and ironclad contract language protecting your schedule. I need to be home by 6, for Harper, already written in. The general paused. Lieutenant Cross, you were right 9 years ago. You were right 3 weeks ago. The military needs people who can see what the systems can't. This position gives you a platform to make that difference. Garrett looked around his apartment. Modest, comfortable, safe. He'd built a life here in the margins, invisible and protected. Taking the position meant visibility. It meant standing behind his judgment publicly. It meant trusting that the truth mattered more than convenience. It meant flying again. Not in a cockpit, but in the way Claire had meant in her letter. I accept. Good. You start Monday. And Lieutenant, sir, welcome back. The call ended. Garrett sat in silence for 3 minutes, processing the impossible fact that 9 years of exile had ended not with apology, but with opportunity. Harper found him there, staring at nothing. Good news? I got my job back. Better than before. So you're not in trouble? Not anymore. Harper climbed into his lap despite being 9 years old and increasingly convinced she was too old for such things. I told you it would work out. You had more faith than I did. Because I know you. You do the right thing even when it's hard. People notice eventually. Took them 9 years. Better late than never. Harper paused. Does this mean we can afford the insulin pump for emergencies? The salary Victoria had mentioned would cover insulin pumps and college savings and the kind of security Garrett had stopped imagining years ago. Yeah, kiddo. We can afford it. Cool. Harper hugged him tighter. Mom would be proud of you. The words broke something in Garrett's chest, broke it open rather than apart. He held his daughter and felt the weight of 9 years lifting fractionally. Not gone. The scars remained, but lighter now, bearable. That weekend, Victoria invited them to dinner at her house in Cherry Creek. Not a corporate function, just the 3 of them and Raymond, who'd been invited as the 4th member of their unlikely alliance. Victoria's home reflected the same aesthetic as her office. Clean lines, minimal decoration, everything serving function. But there were differences. Photographs had appeared on the walls. Her brother Michael in his pilot cadet uniform, her mother at a Navy ceremony. Small admissions of humanity that hadn't existed before. She'd also prepared dinner herself rather than catering it. The result was competent but imperfect. Salmon that was slightly overdone, vegetables that were underseasoned, bread that came from a bakery because attempting homemade would have been aspirational rather than practical. It was the most human thing Garrett had seen her do. Harper helped set the table, chattering about her science fair project and asking Victoria technical questions about satellite deployment that Victoria answered with surprising patience. Raymond arrived with wine and stories about his early flying days that made Harper laugh and made Garrett nostalgic for the career he'd lost. They ate, and for the first time in 9 years, Garrett sat at a table with people who knew who he was, really was, and didn't judge him for it. Over dessert, Victoria pulled out a tablet showing preliminary designs for the Atlas 2.0 system. Mandatory human oversight at every decision point, distributed authority rather than centralized AI, redundant timing synchronization with manual verification protocols. Everything Garrett had suggested, implemented. This is what we're presenting to the Pentagon next month. Elena's leading the redesign. She's working 18-hour days trying to rebuild what she spent 9 years creating. Penance or passion? Raymond asked. Both. Victoria smiled slightly. Turns out being wrong can be highly motivating if you're willing to learn from it. The board approved all of this? Garrett studied the schematics. Unanimously. Even my father voted for it. Victoria's expression was complicated. He called me after the investigation concluded, said I'd made the right call defending you. First time he's said anything like that since Michael died. That must have meant something. It did. Victoria met Garrett's eyes. You taught me that being right matters more than being convenient. That's not a lesson I learned from my family. Harper looked between them with the observational skills of someone who noticed everything adults tried to hide. Are you two friends now? The question hung in the air. Garrett and Victoria had worked together for 8 years without ever really seeing each other. Now they'd fought a board, survived an investigation, and rebuilt a company's safety culture from rubble. Yeah, Garrett said finally. I think we are. Good. Harper returned to her dessert. Dad needs more friends. He's kind of isolated. Raymond laughed. Your daughter has exceptional observational skills. I prefer to call it intellectual curiosity. Harper grinned. The evening wound down with coffee and conversation that felt almost normal. Almost like Garrett hadn't spent 9 years invisible. Almost like the 4 people in Victoria's dining room were colleagues and friends rather than survivors of a corporate crisis that had nearly killed people. When they left, Harper asleep in the car, Raymond walked Garrett to the parking area. You did good, kid. I'm 40 years old. Not really a kid anymore. To a 62-year-old retired colonel, everyone's a kid. Raymond clapped his shoulder. But seriously, you made the hard call. You saved lives. You earned back what they took from you. That's worth celebrating. Doesn't feel like celebration yet. Feels like relief that we survived. Give it time. Raymond paused. You know what the best part is? You get to teach the next generation. All those young engineers and pilots who think autonomous systems are infallible. You get to show them why human judgment still matters. That's legacy, Garrett. That's worth more than any vindication. Garrett carried Harper to their apartment, tucked her into bed, and sat in the quiet darkness, thinking about legacy and second chances, and the strange path that had led from court-martial to vindication through 9 years of invisible work. His phone buzzed. Text from Victoria. Thank you for being stubborn enough to stay right even when no one believed you. He typed back, thank you for listening when it mattered. Her response came immediately. That's what friends do. Garrett smiled despite himself. Friends. After 9 years of carefully maintained distance from everyone except Harper and the memory of Claire, he had friends again. People who knew his story and stood beside him anyway. Monday morning arrived too quickly and not quickly enough. Garrett dropped Harper at school, drove to Apex Tactical Systems, and scanned his badge at the main entrance for the first time in 2 weeks. His new credentials showed Director of Safety Systems Integration with authorization codes that opened doors he'd never been allowed through as equipment coordinator. His office was the same one he'd occupied before being fired, but someone had stocked it with updated technical manuals, installed a second monitor, and left a handwritten note on the desk. "Welcome back. Let's build something that actually works. Elena." The morning was consumed by meetings, safety protocol reviews, Atlas 2.0 design consultations, Pentagon liaison coordination. Every hour scheduled, every minute accounted for. Every conversation focused on implementing the human oversight mandates that had emerged from the demonstration failure. It was exhausting and exhilarating, and exactly what Garrett had trained for in 12 years of flying. At 5:15, his calendar showed one final meeting. Attendee, Victoria Harrington. Location, CEO office. He arrived to find her standing at her window wall, looking out over Denver and the mountains beyond. She turned when he entered. How was the first day back? Productive, overwhelming, different. Different good, or different complicated? Both. Garrett settled into the chair she indicated. "I spent 9 years trying to be invisible. This is the opposite of that." "You'll adjust." Victoria returned to her desk. "I wanted to talk about something before you leave for the day. The Pentagon is requesting a briefing on autonomous system oversight protocols. They want you to present." "Me specifically?" "You specifically. They want the pilot who prevented the Atlas cascade to explain how human judgment integrates with autonomous systems. It's scheduled for 3 weeks from now in Washington." Garrett's stomach tightened. Public testimony. On record. The opposite of everything he'd worked to avoid. "I know it's asking a lot," Victoria said quietly. "But Garrett, you have credibility now. You were right when everyone else was wrong. People will listen to you in ways they won't listen to engineers or executives or even generals. You can change how the military thinks about autonomous systems by reliving the worst moment of my career in front of Congress, by proving that the worst moment of your career was actually your finest." Victoria leaned forward. "You saved lives 9 years ago by overriding a failed system. You saved lives 2 weeks ago the same way. That's not a failure. That's a pattern of excellence that deserves recognition." The old fear whispered its familiar refrain. Visibility means vulnerability. Recognition means risk. Standing out means standing alone when things go wrong. But Claire's letter and Harper's faith and 9 years of evidence suggested something different. Maybe being seen wasn't the danger. Maybe hiding was. "I'll do it." Garrett met Victoria's eyes. "But I leave at 6 tonight. Harper comes first, always." Victoria smiled. "That was already in your contract. Ironclad. Non-negotiable." She paused. "And Garrett? That priority, your daughter mattering more than any job. That's exactly why you're the right person for this work. You understand what's at stake." He left at 5:58, drove to Riverside Academy, and arrived as Harper emerged from after-school science club. She climbed into the car, chattering about a robotics project, and Garrett listened with the attention of someone who'd learned that these moments were what mattered most, not vindication, not recognition, not career resurrection. This, his daughter, her voice, her dreams, her absolute certainty that her father would be there every single day no matter what else demanded his attention. That was the flight that mattered. Everything else was just altitude. 15 months passed in the kind of steady rhythm Garrett had stopped believing was possible. The Pentagon testimony became a turning point, not dramatic, not instant, but real. Garrett stood in a hearing room filled with defense officials and congressional oversight committees and explained in clinical detail why autonomous systems needed human judgment, not as backup, but as partnership. He showed the Atlas failure timeline, the Persian Gulf parallels, the pattern of system confidence exceeding system capability. And people listened. New protocols emerged. Mandatory human oversight for all military autonomous systems. Distributed authority models replacing centralized AI control. Training programs teaching pilots when to trust algorithms and when to trust instinct. The changes rippled across every branch, every contractor, every program that had spent a decade promising that machines could eliminate human error. Garrett became the reluctant face of that transformation. Conference presentations, safety board consultations, training curriculum development, work that mattered, work that used everything he'd learned in 12 years of flying and 9 years of watching from the margins. But every day, without exception, he left at 6 to be home for Harper. Elena's redemption took a different shape. She rebuilt Atlas from its foundation, incorporating every lesson from the Cascade failure. The new system launched successfully 8 months after the original demonstration, executing flawless coordinated flight under human-AI partnership protocols. The Pentagon awarded Apex a modified contract, smaller than the original $3 billion, but substantial, enough to prove the concept, validate the approach, justify continued development. 1 week after the successful Atlas 2.0 demonstration, Elena came to Garrett's office. She looked different, lighter somehow, as if a weight she'd carried for years had finally lifted. "I'm leaving Apex," she said without preamble. "Accepted a teaching position at MIT, Autonomous Systems Ethics and Human Oversight Protocols." Garrett stood from his desk. "That's perfect for you." Brennan would have liked it. Teaching the next generation to question systems, not worship them. Elena pulled a framed photograph from her bag, Brennan Masters in flight suit, smiling with the confidence of someone who believed the sky was infinite. "I want you to have this." He'd want to be remembered by someone who understood what really happened. "Elena, you tried to save him. I spent 9 years blaming you for his death. That was my failure, not yours." Her voice was steady, purpose-driven. "Thank you. For being right. For staying right. For not giving up even when everyone else did." They shook hands, former adversaries, now something closer to allies. "Teach them well," Garrett said. "I'll teach them what you taught me. Systems serve humans, not the other way around. That lesson cost both of us too much to let it be forgotten." Elena left. Garrett looked at Brennan's photo. A good pilot who'd trusted protocol and paid with his life. Now his widow would make sure that sacrifice meant something. Legacy came in unexpected forms. Victoria's transformation was subtler but no less significant. She remained CEO, but her leadership style shifted. Less data-driven autocracy, more collaborative decision-making. She created advisory boards with frontline engineers, established anonymous safety reporting systems, built a culture where raising concerns was rewarded rather than punished. The company thrived under the new approach. Not explosive growth, but steady, sustainable, built on reputation for getting safety right, rather than getting contracts fast. She and Garrett fell into an easy partnership, professional respect that deepened into genuine friendship. They met for coffee every Monday morning to review safety issues. She attended Harper's science fair presentations. He provided perspective when board politics threatened to override engineering judgment. People at Apex started speculating about whether their relationship was more than professional. The speculation was wrong, but neither of them worked particularly hard to correct it. let people wonder. The truth, that two people who'd been adversaries had become trusted allies, was more valuable than any romantic narrative. Raymond retired from consulting 6 months after the demonstration, but he remained involved as an informal mentor. He taught weekend flight classes at a local airfield, taking up young pilots and old ones who needed reminders about why human judgment mattered. Garrett joined him sometimes, sitting right seat in a Cessna 172, remembering what it felt like to have sky beneath his wings, instead of just protocols on a screen. "You miss it," Raymond said during one of those flights. Not a question, a statement, every day. "But I wouldn't trade what I have now to get it back. You could fly again. Test pilot work, civilian aviation. You've got the credentials restored." Garrett looked out at the Colorado landscape, sliding past beneath them, mountains and plains, and the city where Harper was probably working on homework or building something that would astound her teachers. "I am flying. Just different altitude." Raymond smiled. Claire would approve. Yeah, she would. Harper grew into her brilliance the way some children grew into height. Inevitable, undeniable, occasionally awkward. At 10 years old, she was taking pre-algebra and asking questions about orbital mechanics that made her teachers consult Garrett for answers. Her science projects progressed from model satellites to functional propulsion systems to theoretical papers on human-AI collaboration in aerospace engineering. She won regional competitions, state recognition, scholarship offers from programs designed to identify future engineers before they reached high school. Every achievement made Garrett's chest swell with pride and terror in equal measure. She had Claire's mind and his determination, a combination that would take her far beyond the modest apartment they still called home. "You could move somewhere bigger," Victoria mentioned once. "Your salary certainly supports it." Garrett had looked around their small living room, Harper's drawing still covering the refrigerator, Claire's photograph on the shelf, the worn couch where they'd weathered storms and celebrated victories. This is home. Size doesn't change that. On a Saturday afternoon in early autumn, Garrett took Harper to the small airfield where Raymond taught. She'd asked, carefully casual, whether she could try flying. Not lessons, not officially. Just to see what it felt like. Raymond met them with a Cessna 172 already pre-flighted, the same model Garrett had learned in 2 decades ago. Harper approached it with reverence, running her hand along the fuselage with the kind of careful attention most kids reserved for puppies or new toys. "It's smaller than I thought it would be." Most things are. Garrett helped her into the right seat, adjusted the harness until it fit her small frame. But size doesn't determine capability. Some of the most powerful systems in the world fit in packages you wouldn't notice. Like you? The observation landed with characteristic Harper precision. "Like a lot of things, kiddo." Raymond took the left seat, walked her through the pre-flight checklist with patience that came from 30 years of teaching. Harper absorbed every detail, asked questions that showed she understood not just the what, but the why. When Raymond started the engine, her face transformed into pure wonder. They taxied to the runway, Raymond handling the controls while Harper watched and learned. Then, in the air, he guided her hands to the yoke. "Your airplane." Harper's grip was tentative at first, then gradually confident as she felt the aircraft respond to her inputs. Small corrections, gentle turns. The beginning understanding that flying was conversation between pilot and machine, not domination of one by the other. Garrett watched from the ground, his heart somewhere between his throat and his chest. His daughter, Claire's daughter, their legacy in motion at 1,500 feet. She had his blood and Claire's brilliance and neither of their scars yet. Maybe she never would. Maybe the next generation could learn the lessons without paying the same prices. They landed 20 minutes later. Harper emerged from the aircraft transformed, still his 10-year-old daughter, but with something new in her eyes. Understanding. Possibility. The first glimpse of the future she might choose. That was amazing. She hugged Garrett with fierce intensity. I want to do that again. We can arrange that. But Dad? She pulled back, looked up at him with those two perceptive eyes. When's the last time you flew? Really flew, not just sat in the passenger seat? Garrett glanced at Raymond, who was making a show of tying down the aircraft and definitely not listening to their conversation. 9 years. Maybe a little more. That's too long. You should fly again. Not for work. For you. The suggestion sat between them like a challenge and an invitation. Garrett had told himself for years that he didn't need to fly, that watching Harper grow and fixing safety systems and honoring Claire's memory was enough. But standing on the tarmac with autumn wind carrying the scent of aviation fuel and possibility, he wondered if maybe his daughter was right. Maybe it was time. 2 weeks later, on a Sunday morning when Harper was at a robotics workshop, Garrett met Raymond at the airfield. Just the two of them and a Cessna and open sky. You sure about this? Raymond asked. No, but I'm doing it anyway. They pre-flighted together, Garrett's hands remembering the patterns they'd learned 20 years ago and practiced for 12. Everything was familiar and foreign simultaneously. The controls where he expected them, but the context completely changed. He'd been a test pilot, evaluating aircraft worth hundreds of millions. Now he was a safety director taking a recreational flight in a plane that cost less than a luxury car. But the fundamentals were the same. Physics didn't care about job titles or career trajectories. Lift and thrust and drag and weight operated regardless of who sat in the cockpit. Garrett took the left seat. Raymond took the right. The engine started with a roar that resonated in Garrett's chest like coming home. They lifted off into Colorado sky, and for the first time in 9 years, Garrett wasn't running from flight or hiding from who he'd been, or choosing between the sky and his daughter. He was just flying. The aircraft responded to his inputs with the honest feedback of mechanical systems unmediated by automation. When he banked, the horizon tilted because he'd commanded it to. When he climbed, the altimeter wound up because his hand on the throttle made it so. Direct, immediate, real. Raymond said nothing, just let Garrett reacquaint himself with the sky. They flew north toward Wyoming, following highways and rivers, staying low enough to see details but high enough to feel the perspective that only altitude provided. After 30 minutes, Raymond spoke quietly. How's it feel? Like remembering something I'd forgotten I knew. That's because you never actually forgot. You just stopped practicing. Garrett executed a gentle turn, feeling the coordination of rudder and aileron and elevator that was more muscle memory than conscious thought. Claire's letter said to fly through them, not away from them. Looks like you're doing exactly that. They returned to the airfield an hour later. Garrett landed the Cessna with a smoothness that surprised him. 3-point touchdown, minimal float, centerline tracking that would have satisfied any instructor. The kind of landing that came from skill that had gone dormant but never died. On the ground, shutting down the engine, Garrett sat in the sudden quiet and felt something unlock in his chest. Not healing. Some scars were permanent, but acceptance, integration. The pilot he'd been and the father he'd become weren't separate identities anymore. They were the same person, just operating at different altitudes. That evening, Harper asked how the flight went. Garrett told her about the Colorado landscape from 1,500 feet. about the way physics still worked the same whether you flew fighters or Cessnas, about remembering what it felt like to trust his hands and his training and his judgment simultaneously. So you're going to keep flying, recreationally, on weekends when you're busy with your projects. Nothing that interferes with being home for you. Good. Harper returned to her homework, then paused. Dad, Mom would be really proud of you. Not just for the flying, for everything. The words settled over Garrett like a blessing he hadn't known he needed. How do you know? Because I read all her letters, the ones for when I'm older. She wrote them knowing you'd figure this out eventually, that you'd find a way to fly and be my dad and honor what you both built together. Garrett's vision blurred. You read all of them? Just the one for age 10. I'm saving the others for when I actually turn those ages. But that one, she knew, Dad. She knew you'd come back to the sky. She just wanted to make sure you brought us with you when you did. In the quiet of their small apartment, with Harper's homework spread across the table and the distant sound of Denver traffic outside, Garrett felt the last piece of 9-year exile finally release its grip. He'd chosen Harper over vindication, family over career, presence over pride, and somehow, impossibly, he'd gotten everything back. Not the same way, not the same shape, but real and whole and enough. Claire had known, Harper understood, and Garrett, finally, after 9 years of hiding and fighting and surviving, could accept what they'd both been trying to tell him. He'd never stopped flying. He'd just found better sky. 6 months later, on Harper's 11th birthday, the morning arrived bright and clear. Garrett woke her with pancakes, his fourth meal mastered after years of practice, shaped like rockets because she'd requested them. After breakfast, he handed her a small wrapped box. Harper opened it carefully. Inside was a flight logbook, leather-bound, her name embossed on the cover in gold lettering. She opened the first page and found a single entry in Garrett's handwriting. First flight with Dad, October 15th. Natural talent, steady hands, asked all the right questions. She flew like she was born to it. Maybe she was. G.C. Harper held it like the treasure it was, understanding in her eyes. When I'm old enough for real lessons, when you're old enough, I'll teach you myself. Everything I know. Everything your mom would have wanted you to learn. Deal. She hugged him, then pulled back with that mischievous smile she'd inherited from Claire. But you have to promise one thing. What's that? You have to keep flying, too. Not just teaching me. Flying for yourself. Garrett laughed, the sound surprising him with its ease. Deal. That afternoon, they drove to the small airfield where Raymond kept his Cessna. Harper in the right seat again. Garrett in the left. Raymond watching from the ground as mentor and friend. Garrett took them up into Colorado sky. Not as Ghost 7, not as the pilot who'd been erased, not as the man who'd hidden for 9 years. Just as Harper's father, Claire's husband, the person who'd learned that some flights took you away from everything that mattered, and some flights brought you home. Harper's hands rested lightly on her half of the yoke, feeling the aircraft respond to her father's inputs, learning the conversation between human and machine that Garrett had spent a lifetime mastering. Dad, can I try a turn? Your airplane. Harper's hands took control, tentative but growing confident. The Cessna banked gently to the right, responding to her touch. Garrett's hands stayed ready, but didn't interfere. Below them, Denver spread out in afternoon light. Apex Tactical Systems, a glass building where broken systems were being rebuilt with human wisdom. A small apartment where a father and daughter had weathered every storm together. A school where Harper would return Monday, brilliant and strange and exactly herself. And above them, infinite sky. Not escape, not hiding, just the place where everything else became clear. Harper leveled the wings, looked at her father, grinned. "This is amazing." "Yeah, kiddo, it really is." They flew together in comfortable silence, father and daughter, legacy and future, proving that the most important flight wasn't the one that took you highest or fastest or farthest. It was the one that brought you home. Garrett thought about Claire's letter, about the words that had guided him through 9 years of exile and back to this moment. Fly again, not away from us, through us. He'd done exactly that, and in doing so, he discovered something Claire had known all along. The sky was never the destination. It was just the place where you could see clearly what mattered most. Harper beside him, learning to fly. Claire's memory still guiding them both. The certainty that choosing family over glory had been the right call all along. Some revolutions started with whispers. Some started with a father choosing his daughter over everything else, then discovering that everything else had been there all along. Just at a different altitude, just through a different flight path, just exactly where it needed to be. Garrett squeezed Harper's hand once, then released the controls completely. "Your airplane, pilot." Harper's voice came steady and sure. "I've got it, Dad." And she did.